Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're anything like me, you probably got into this whole planted aquarium thing because you pictured this gorgeous, lush, underwater paradise, right? Healthy plants literally breathe life into the tank, filtering the water and creating this cozy, stable home for all your little aquatic buddies. But getting those vivid greens and fiery reds isn't just about tossing some plants in and hoping for the best. It turns out there's a little secret sauce involved. You know that feeling when your plants are just existing, like they're not dying, but they're not exactly throwing a party either? Yeah, that's super common, especially for us new aquascapers. The honest truth is, the natural CO2 and nutrient levels in most aquariums just aren't quite enough for that truly vibrant, bursting with life growth we dream of. We're talking about the difference between your plants just surviving and them truly reaching their full, gorgeous potential. For anyone serious about creating those jaw-dropping aquascapes, we want our plants to be as lush and amazing as possible. And to do that, you'll need to go beyond what your tank naturally offers. That's why understanding these little oopsies and knowing how to supplement them is such a game changer. Let's kick things off with CO2, or carbon dioxide. Seriously, think of CO2 as the absolute cornerstone of plant growth. It's the main ingredient plants use for photosynthesis, that magical process where they basically turn light energy into their dinner. Your aquatic plants happily slurp up CO2 from the water, mix it with light, and voila. They create their own energy, grow big and strong, and as a little bonus, they release the oxygen that keeps everyone else in the tank happy. Now, most aquatic plants are like, give me that dissolved CO2 gas, please. But here's a cool little survival trick. Some really tough plant species, especially in harder water, can actually use bicarbonate as a backup carbon source. It's like their emergency ration. But here's the catch. It takes way more energy for the plant to do that. So if they're relying on bicarbonate, they'll generally grow much slower and just won't have that vibrant sparkle. Honestly, CO2 is often called the most important nutrient for aquatic plants. Why? Because carbon is pretty much the main building block of a plant. Imagine trying to build a beautiful house but running out of lumber halfway through. It doesn't matter how many nails or bricks you have, you just can't finish the job. That's kind of what happens to your plants without enough CO2. Even if you have perfect lighting and all the other nutrients, your plants will just sit there struggling. This is based on something pretty smart called Liebig's Law of the Minimum, which basically says your plant's growth is limited by whatever essential resource is in shortest supply. So, if CO2 is the bottleneck in your tank, adding more nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium won't magically fix things. That's why getting your CO2 levels dialed in is often the very first and most impactful step to truly supercharge your plant growth. All right, so where does CO2 naturally come from in your tank? Well, there are a few sources, but spoiler alert, they're usually not enough for that incredibly lush look we're all after. Your adorable fish, shrimp, and other critters are constantly breathing out CO2, just like we do. Likewise, when old plant leaves, that little bit of uneaten food or other organic stuff breaks down, even the good bacteria in your substrate are doing their part, and a tiny, tiny bit of CO2 from the air can actually dissolve into your tank water at the surface. But here's the kicker. Even with all these natural sources, the CO2 levels in a typical planted tank, especially one with good light and fast-growing plants, are almost always too low for really strong, healthy growth. In most tanks, natural CO2 levels are super low, usually around 2 to 4 parts per million, or ppm. But for really happy, vibrant plant growth, you're actually looking for something more like 15-25 ppm, or even up to 35 ppm in some more advanced setups. Without that extra CO2, your plants are going to seriously struggle to make their food, leading to stunted growth, unhappy plants, and, yep, you guessed it, more algae. And seriously, who wants that? This difference is why you hear people talk about low-tech and high-tech aquariums, low-tech tanks. These typically have weaker lights and slower-growing plants like anubias or ferns. In these setups, the natural CO2 from your fish and the breakdown of organic stuff might just be enough for your plants to survive and grow slowly, like they're just chilling. High-tech tanks. These are designed for super fast, incredibly lush growth, often with intense lighting and plants that are a bit more demanding. If you want that explosive growth, that vibrant jungle feel, you simply have to add CO2. So, deciding whether to add CO2 isn't just a random choice you make, It totally depends on what kind of plant growth you're aiming for and how intense your other factors, especially your lighting, happen to be. Low tech is all about letting nature do its thing, while high tech is about giving nature a serious boost to get those amazing results. All right, so you're thinking, okay, I get it, I need more CO2, but how do you actually get it into your tank? Good news, there are a few common ways, each with its own quirks and benefits. First up, we have pressurized CO2 injection systems. These advanced systems are generally considered the gold standard for getting CO2 into a planted tank. It's basically a little kit, a refillable CO2 gas cylinder. Think of it like a mini fire extinguisher for your tank. You'll also need a regulator, which is super important for controlling the gas flow. A dual stage one is even better for really steady output. Then there's a solenoid valve that magically turns the CO2 on and off automatically with your tank lights, so no gas is wasted overnight. You'll want a bubble counter so you can actually see how much CO2 is flowing, and finally, a diffuser or reactor that brilliantly dissolves the CO2 into tiny bubbles your plants can easily absorb. What's so great about them? They offer super control and stability for your CO2 levels, meaning happy, healthy plants and fewer algae surprises. Those dual-stage regulators are awesome because they keep the CO2 super steady. This leads to explosive plant growth. With plenty of CO2, your plants will seriously take off. You'll often see something called purling, which is tiny oxygen bubbles fizzing off your plant leaves, a sure sign your plants are literally bursting with happiness and doing their thing. If you want those amazing carpeting plants or those truly vibrant reds, pressurized CO2 is basically a must-have. Plus, they're customizable and automatable for pretty much any tank size, and you can even get fancy and automate them with a pH controller. Now for the downsides, there's a high upfront cost, often a few $100s. There's also a bit of a tricky setup and more work involved in fine-tuning, and because your plants will grow so fast, you'll be trimming more often and probably need to fertilize more too. It's a happy problem, but still a problem. And finally, safety first. These cylinders hold gas at super high pressure, so you have to handle them with care and keep them secure, away from curious kids and pets. And this is really, really important. Overdosing CO2 is a top reason why fish can get sick or even die in planted tanks. Too much CO2 can literally suffocate your fish or cause dangerous sudden pH drops. So always, always be careful. Next up are bio-CO2 systems, often called yeast-based or citric acid and baking soda systems. These are basically DIY setups where you mix ingredients and water in a sealed bottle, the producing CO2 gas that then bubbles into your tank through a simple airline. The good stuff, they're super cheap to set up and run, making them a great starting point if you're just dipping your toes in and on a budget. They can work good for small, easy tanks or tiny nano tanks, where you don't need super precise or super high CO2 levels. But there are some big downsides. They're wildly unstable and unpredictable. You have almost no control over how much CO2 they produce, leading to inconsistent levels that can stress plants and, ironically, often lead to algae outbreaks. Plus, you'll need to change the yeast mixture every few weeks. They also have limited power and just don't produce enough CO2 for larger tanks or those with bright lights and demanding plants. Finally, we have liquid carbon products, often sold as CO2 boosters or liquid CO2. Now, here's the real deal. These don't actually contain liquid CO2. Their main ingredient is usually glutaraldehyde, which is mostly an algaecide, meaning it helps zap algae, and it only provides a very, very tiny amount of carbon to your plants. The perks. They're super easy to use. Just drop it directly into your tank. They're great for algae control, especially stubborn types like blackbrush algae. And they're cheap for tiny tanks where only minimal carbon supplementation is desired. Always follow the directions carefully. And finally, they are no substitute for pressurized CO2 if you're serious about lush, vibrant growth, especially in a larger or demanding tank. So, if you're looking to truly supercharge your planted tank and see those incredible results, getting your CO2 right is truly the first step. Next time, we'll dive into the big three macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and why they're just as important. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that vital information. And as always, hit that like button if this helped you out. Thanks for watching, and happy aquascaping.